pavement will have patterns within it which subconsciously separate you as you move around those spaces.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining me on Tail Talks. Could you just give a bit of an overview of who you are and the business that you run?
Yeah, so my name is Sara Boland and I'm Managing Director of Influence, and we're landscape architects. So the business is sort of dual purpose. We major in landscape design and landscape planning, which is quite a unique position for a landscape company.
Fantastic. And I think this is really going to be interesting, because when we were talking prior to this, you were talking about some of the challenges of how spaces are going to change with social distancing. I think it's going to be really interesting. So what challenges are you kind of currently facing, and how are you going to hopefully adapt to these challenges moving forward?
Yeah, I think it is something I hadn't initially thought about. At the outset, you're just very concerned about your own business and about keeping the cogs turning, but then after a while you begin to think about the value that your profession and your business brings to everybody else. And because you're not a key worker and a frontline worker, I think you're very acutely aware of whether you are bringing that value to other people. And then we started to take a step back and think about all of the spaces that we're going to be designing and resolving and bringing to the fore, that everybody is going to be using. And I think I was talking to my colleague Shona, and we were talking about the fact that, maybe this won't affect us as a generation, the 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, but our children, who are sort of 7 and 10, they socialise and they use digital and media so much to communicate with each other, and that, I think, will filter down into their external spaces. So they'll be looking for a different product when they are consciously using these outdoor spaces. Adding to that, I think they will be very acutely aware of the pandemic, and that will continue to sort of influence how they function and behave as they become adults and make choices about spaces that they use. So I think it's going to be really challenging but interesting for us as designers to be able to integrate everything we've learnt from this pandemic into our designs without making it kind of crude and abrasive and too sort of in your face, a piece of tape on a pavement type scenario.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, because obviously you go around supermarkets and everywhere at the minute, it's just tape everywhere. But if it can be integrated in some way, it makes sense, doesn't it? And I think it's not just for pandemic's sake, it's just for everyone's sake in general. So I think in other countries such as Asia, they're very good at, if you've got a cold, you wear a face mask, but maybe in the UK it's slightly different culture. So that cultural change, I imagine, is going to be really interesting. Have you got some other examples then of things that maybe already are happening, or you maybe got in the pipeline, or that you've seen with this change that might already be taking place and starting?
Yeah, I was watching a webinar only the other day that was organised through the Built Environment, and one of the speakers there was from the Rioja Estate, who are bringing forward the new outlet centre at Grantham, the new retail outlet at Grantham. And he was talking about the fact that they're already looking at integrated solutions internally, but also in their public realm. Sort of the pavement will have patterns within it which subconsciously separate you as you move around those spaces. The benches and things will be designed so that maybe, people will almost be guided on how to sit and how to sort of how close to be to people. Because I think the question over whether we'll look back and go, oh, remember that year or that 6 months we spent in lockdown, or whether we will subconsciously change, is going round and round in all sorts of people's minds. And I think, for one, a part of us will remain conscious of the pandemic we've been through, and we will naturally not gather in the same way as we gathered before. So big spaces, say Nottingham Market Square, these big Christmas markets, those big events in these big spaces. What does the future hold for that kind of event, and therefore that kind of space, and how do we learn from that and take that forward to the high street funding, high streets that are coming forward, the heritage action zone spaces that are coming forward. It's upon us to try to understand what people will want going forward and to sort of enact that through our designs, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And how many other people potentially will this impact? Obviously, you know, it's the people that are using the spaces, but industry-wise, what are the types of industries and people could this actually impact?
Well, in terms of our side of the fence, I guess, in terms of the people who are bringing forward, you've got your engineers, your transport planners, you've got your sort of civils and structural M&E, all of those construction and contractors. You know, they will have to. There's likely to be more cost. You could assume in bringing forward more. Not really bespoke, but kind of it's a different way of bringing something forward, isn't it? So we've got to kind of think again, and that might bring a cost. It's going to affect people. You know, Kate Ellis, who works for Lincoln City, was on this webinar, and they're bringing forward a master plan for the city of Lincoln and for the Cornhill area, and she was talking again about how that's going to affect them as a city, but then you've got the retailers and all of the people who are the functioning part of those spaces. So it's really multi-layered from the user down to the people who are kind of working in it, and then the people who are designing it as well. Yeah,
no, that makes sense. And what advice then would you give for people who want to try and adapt and be proactive about these things? What would you suggest the types of things that they can kind of look to do at this moment in time?
I think we've got to go back maybe to some of the principles of placemaking, and placemaking is born out of this sort of layering of environmental, political, cultural, and from that you should bring forward designs rather than kind of contrive a design to fit a space or fit a situation. And placemaking goes back to identity and uniqueness of a space. So I think maybe some of us, or a lot of us, have got to go back to those inherent, I suppose the inherent parts of designing, particularly public spaces, and really think about the needs and the functionality of those spaces, but particularly the people who are going to be using them. You know, different parts of the country will bring about different challenges, and there'll be some really simple resolutions that we can do, and there'll be some really complex.
No, it makes sense, definitely. And I think, you know, for people who maybe aren't sure how these changes are going to occur, what would you kind of suggest they look out for, kind of try to adapt?
A bit going back to what I touched on earlier was how the different generations will be affected by this pandemic, and think about how the generations coming on after us how they socialise, how they communicate, how they interact already, and how different that is from us. We're a bit sort of, you know, old dog new tricks, but these, you know, the generation, I can't remember whether Generation X or millennials or whatever, but you know, the kids now are going to be using spaces very differently. But I also think that the COVID-19 pandemic may be more locked into their psyche than it is to us as a generation. And then I think we've just got to take a step back as a design industry, and the COVID-19 has got to be one of the constraints that gets added into our sort of when we're doing our first testing of bringing design forward, but also that it can bring opportunities. You know, the opportunities have become a lot less selfish. They've started to function more in their local environment. They've become maybe more appreciative of what they've got, maybe less materialistic. And I think all of those kind of things will feed into how we bring spaces and how we bring design forward.
Brilliant. No, I love that. I think that's a fantastic way to end. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see over the coming months, years, how these changes are developed and what happens. So I really look forward to seeing what changes. If there's anyone watching that wants to find out a little bit more about how you're making those changes, is it okay for people to get in touch with you and just find out a little bit more?
Yeah, of course, that would be fantastic. Yeah, we'd love to hear from different people and to learn from them about, you know, what they're doing across different professions, sort of within the built environment which we work in. Yeah.
Brilliant, perfect. We'll leave it at that. But thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks for joining us on Tail Talks, and good luck with everything. Hope it goes well.
Cheers. Thank you. Take care.